Good evening.
Presidential debates can brand candidates as winners or losers. Remember John F. Kennedy's breezy, youthful glamour against Richard Nixon's sweaty 5 o'clock shadow. Or Ronald Reagan's simple, good-natured style against Jimmy Carter's earnest recital of facts. With the shock value of reality TV star Donald Trump,
you're fired.
This time the presidential debate is on course to be the most watched in American history. Voters have seen Mr. Trump belittle his male opponents.
Quiet.
But that bullying style could backfire with a female candidate. He doesn't do so well with women. So far, though, he hasn't been holding back.
If Hillary Clinton were a man, I don't think she'd get 5% of the vote.
And affordable child care is playing the woman card, then deal me in.
This is Hillary Clinton's comfort zone. She's an experienced, competitive debater, super prepared. She'll be trying to rattle Mr. Trump, get under his skin. He, on the other hand, much prefers 140 characters. But can he stay focused for 90 minutes of substantive questions? And will it even matter? Up till now, the two candidates have been judged by different standards.
I don't know what I said.
So could he win simply by doing nothing outrageous, while Mrs. Clinton would have to put in the most polished of performances to beat him? Millions of Americans will be tuning in to find out. Barbara Plett-Usher, BBC News, New York.
Let's go over to New York and talk to Kim Katos, who's in our studio there. Kim, hearing predictions about a Super Bowl-size audience. This is promising to be quite an event.
Yes, indeed. This is going to be a national gathering around TV sets around the country. There are going to be hundreds of watch parties held by different campaigns. This is a highly anticipated event, the most anticipated event in American political history. 3 out of 4 Americans have said that they will be watching. That's probably around 100 million people, and then add on all the millions of people who will be tuning in from around the world, because of course an election in the US has ripple effects around the world as well. The key question here is what to expect. And it is going to be unpredictable because we don't know what kind of style, what kind of personality Donald Trump is going to bring to the stage. Is he going to be his usual unpredictable self, shooting from the hip, trying to rattle his opponent, belittling his opponent the way he did in the Republican debates with his opponents then? Or is he going to try to lay low to prove that he can be presidential and stay focused as much as possible on the substance? He hasn't given many policy details so far in this election campaign. And then on Hillary Clinton's side, as we just heard there from my colleague Barbara Plett-Usher, the bar is quite high because she needs to show not just that she is who she is, which is a policy wonk who has the experience, but she has to sway the undecided voters who are still out there, particularly at this moment when the polls are tightening and some polls are showing that Donald Trump is in the lead. In the end, she has to do what no one has managed to do before, which is win in a debate against Donald Trump. He had 12 debates with his Republican opponents, and he came out on top at the end.
Kim, thanks very much for the moment. Kim Katos there in New York. And there is full coverage of that first presidential debate of 2016 here on BBC World News. It's taking place in a few hours' time in the States, in New York. That's 0100 GMT on Tuesday. And just have a look at the BBC website if you want analysis of the run-up to the election from our correspondents and editors reporting right across the US. Now, the conflict between the Colombian government and FARC rebels has lasted more than 50 years. It's cost more than 250,000 lives and led to the displacement of millions. But in just a few hours' time, that civil war will officially come to an end when a peace deal is signed in the city of Cartagena. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, is there. And Lise, what a road it has been to get to this point.
What a road, a very violent road. Colombia has long been a byword for the worst of atrocities. And now today, here on the edge of the old city of Cartagena, the northern coast of Colombia, history will be made, ending a 52-year-long war. It means What they're saying here is that it's the end of the Cold War. The FARC guerrilla movement, which was established in 1964, the last of the movements inspired by Che Guevara, and the Colombian government today signing a peace deal. And the pen will be made from the bullet from that long war which left so many people dead and tens of thousands kidnapped, murdered and disappeared. But making peace with FARC has also left Colombia polarized. There are many who say they are paying too high a price, that FARC is getting away with its crimes. In a moment, we'll speak to one of the negotiators who helped reach this historic accord. But first, let's look at this report about the mood now in Colombia. There's been a lifetime of an ugly war in the pristine mountains of northern Colombia. Some of the worst atrocities took place here. And the scars remain. And people can't forget the brutality of the FARC. Dubi's family fled the fighting like everyone else here. They'd recruit not just men, but women too, she says. We were all afraid we'd be killed. They'd make you cook for them, then kill you. And the fear's not gone. This farmer won't show his face. FARC murdered his two brothers, but he's ready to make peace now. We'll eradicate a brand name, he says, for terrorism, massacres, disappearances. I went to meet the deal's chief architect, the president, in the capital, Bogota. He told me it was a game changer.
This is the last armed conflict in the whole of the Western Hemisphere. The oldest, the cruelest. The Cold War is really ending on Monday when the agreement is signed. So it has a tremendous significance.
Not yet, until it's approved. It won't end until October the 2nd. You get a yes.
I am absolutely sure that it will be approved.
Everyone, including FARC, wants this war to end. But at what price? The fighters are to give up their guns and criminal activity, including the drug trade. They'll become a political party and face a special tribunal for their worst atrocities. The critics say they're getting away with it.
They're not getting away with it. My instructions to the negotiators was you go and seek the maximum justice that will allow us peace. And I think we struck a good deal.
This deal promises Colombians a better future. No one says it's perfect. And in Bogota's main square, we heard worry about the way ahead.
These people putting down their guns, all they've ever done is extort money, commit crimes. The change will be too extreme. They'll continue as they used to.
President Santos told us this is the best chance for peace, to end 50 years of war.
Ojalá fuera verdad.
I wish it were true, she says. Do you have a plan B if the people of Colombia vote no on October the 2nd?
We will go back 6 years and continue the war with the FARC. That's the plan B.
The campaigns to vote sí, yes, or no intensify. If the polls are to be believed, a majority does agree the deal is the best chance to end the war, even if making peace will be just as hard. But it was hard to make peace. Years of negotiations taking place in Cuba and other capitals in this region, and also years of secret talks. Norway and Cuba were involved, and there were also advice provided by individual mediators, including Jonathan Powell, who was the chief negotiator on the Northern Ireland peace deal, was an advisor to President Santos of Colombia, and is now trying to work on Syria. Jonathan Powell, first of all, explain to us how important this achievement is here today.
This is a really major achievement, a 52-year war, 250,000 dead, tens of millions displaced. It's really the last guerrilla war in Latin America. It's finished. It is the end of the Cold War. And I think it's a really significant moment.
What is it about this one that it succeeded? As you know, we see very few peace deals being signed these days around the world.
There's a pattern. You usually get to an agreement where there is a mutually hurting stalemate. That means both sides realize they can't win. And President Uribe and President Santos, when he was defense minister, hit the FARC hard. On the back of that military success, both strong leaders on both sides were prepared to come to an agreement. And President Santos deserves a huge amount of credit. He paid a big political price for doing this peace process, and he has succeeded. So it's a very big day for him.
He told me about how he had been struck by an IRA bomb when he was in London many decades ago, and that he took advice from you during the process. What were the lessons from Northern Ireland that you brought here that actually worked?
Well, one of the most important things that President Santos did was to learn lessons, both learn lessons from failed processes here in the past, the Kagwan process 10, 15 years ago, which completely failed. They had an agenda of 100 points, including the end of capitalism. It wasn't a serious negotiation. And he drew lessons from Northern Ireland. We had a number of experts from elsewhere who had experience in the Middle East, in South Africa and elsewhere. And he brought all that expertise together to try and learn lessons from what had happened elsewhere and apply them here. And the most important one was to have really firm foundations for the negotiation. They had 1 year of secret negotiations where they drew up an agenda, only 5 points on that agenda, only the things he should be talking to terrorists about, not the things he shouldn't. And it was because of that firm foundation he succeeded.
Do you think it's going to stick?
I think it will. It's going to be very difficult. First, he has to win a referendum, as we did in Northern Ireland. And if you remember, the referendum in Northern Ireland too was very touch and go. We had problems with the unionists not supporting the agreement. And once he's done that, he's got to implement the agreement. Most agreements fail during implementation. 2/3 of agreements fail during implementation. And this one will be particularly hard. This is a very violent country, geographically challenged with huge mountain ranges. So actually making this happen is going to be enormously difficult. But I think it will work this time.
And from here, you're going to go on to discussions about Syria. It's tragic to see that Syria in 5 years has more dead than in Colombia in 50 years. You can't compare to conflict, but would there be any kind of lessons out of this process for those struggling to get people to the table in Syria?
Yes, I think there are. This is one of the few bright spots in the world. People can look here and see that you can succeed, that a negotiation can work. Now, that may be some way off in Syria when we look at the tragedy of Aleppo and see what's happening to the civilians there from the Russians and from the Syrian regime. But even so, even that conflict will end in the end in a negotiation. We know that when we look around the world. And what we have to do is work towards getting to that solution, getting to that peaceful outcome. And I hope it comes soon for the good of the people of Syria.
In that conflict, in this conflict, in almost every peace process, one of the real problems is how to achieve peace and justice, to get the balance right. The critics here say that President Santos gave away too much. He's letting the FARC get away with their crimes. What do you say to that?
You have to strike a balance in these agreements. Now, in the Northern Ireland Agreement, for example, we let IRA terrorists out of jail after just 2 years, even murderers. It was a very difficult thing to do, and most agreements end with amnesty for the terrorists. This is the first time it hasn't ended that way because of the ICC. We now have the International Criminal Court, and you can't just let people go. You can't just let bygones be bygones. There has to be some sort of justice for the victims. And they've struck a good balance here, I think, between justice for the victims and making sure there won't be new victims. Because if you're absolutely purist on the justice side, then there are going to be more people dying because you won't end the conflict. If you go to a terrorist leader and say to him, I want you to sign this agreement, have peace, and go to jail for 35 years, for some reason they're not ready to sign. You've got to get that balance, and I think they've got the right balance here.
And having got FARC to agree to that, do you think they're going to, can they be trusted?
You only trust people on both sides as far as they implement what they've done. And you have an agreement exactly because you don't trust each other. The piece of paper doesn't make you trust each other anymore. It's only when you do the things you said you're going to do on that piece of paper that trust begins to be built. And I think that is going to happen here. If you look at the FARC convention last week in the jungle, it looks like they're serious about it. They want to be a political party, and I think this really is the end of the last civil war in Latin America.
Jonathan Powell of Intermediate, former negotiator of Northern Ireland, thank you very much for joining us here. Jonathan, dressed in white as all the guests, some 2,500 guests from around the world have been asked to do, including presidents, prime ministers and many foreign ministers, including the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. He'll be watching this with great interest. He's been struggling to make any progress in Syria. But today for Colombia, for Colombians who support this process, it is truly a day to celebrate. That's all from us here in Cartagena, but we'll have more coverage throughout the day.
Lise, thanks very much. Lise Duceppe in Cartagena. And we will have live coverage of that signing in just a few hours' time. To find out more about the agreement, just go to the website bbc.com/news. There is in-depth coverage, including a page all about the FARC, the origins of the group, what they were fighting for and what brought them to the negotiating table. Russia is warning the chances for peace in Syria could be undermined by British and American claims that Moscow has committed war crimes in the northern city of Aleppo. The BBC's Panorama programme has been following the lives of people living there in Aleppo. This report from Quentin Somerville contains from the start scenes you might find upsetting.
Aleppo has never been more overwhelmed. At Al-Quds Hospital, the wounded lie in corridors. There aren't any beds. They're fast running out of medical supplies. 4 days of relentless Russian and Syrian bombing of civilians has done this. The bombs are bigger and the air raids more intensive now. 61 children were admitted to city hospitals overnight. In one, 5 died at the weekend because there were no ventilators. The BBC's Panorama has been following Ismail, a rescue worker. The regime dropped 2 barrel bombs here. More than 15 people died. They'd been attending a funeral for victims of an earlier bombing. Aleppo has had no time to catch its breath, and here there is no time to grieve.
To be honest, I'm really tired. I'm very exhausted at this time. Sometimes I got feeling that I'm living the last days of my life. Aleppo is burning without any mercy, killing everything.
Armageddon, apocalypse, strong words are being used to describe what is happening here. But sometimes it's the quietest moments that reflect Aleppo's despair. Mohammed Janidi calls for his son Hussam. He's lying inside the body bag. The family moved here 5 years ago. They never thought it would end like this. But then, who could have predicted Aleppo's horrors? Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Beirut.
Well, the full Panorama programme is on tonight on BBC One at 8:30 here in the UK. If you're outside the UK, it's on BBC World News on Saturday the 1st of October at 9:30 and 21:30 GMT. And if you missed that, it's on again on Sunday the 2nd at 2:30 GMT and 15:30 GMT. Well, humanitarian aid has finally reached 4 besieged areas in Syria that have received nothing for 6 months. The International Committee of the Red Cross says convoys delivered food and medical supplies for 60,000 people to towns near Damascus and villages in Idlib province. Last week, the UN suspended aid deliveries across Syria for 48 hours after a deadly attack on a convoy. Look at the day's other news. And the French president has said he wants to close the sprawling jungle migrant camp in Calais by the end of this year under a plan to spread asylum seekers around the country. Anyone not given asylum in France will be deported. During a visit to the port in northern France, François Hollande has urged Britain to play its part in tackling the migration crisis there. He said Britain's vote to leave the European Union didn't absolve it from its obligations to France. Police in the US state of Texas say 9 people have been injured in a shooting near a shopping centre in the city of Houston. The police say they shot and killed the suspect, describing him as a lawyer whose firm had problems. Police say no one else was thought to be involved. Police investigating the disappearance of the toddler Ben Needham, who vanished 25 years ago, have begun excavation work at a site on the Greek island of Kos. Ben was 21 months old when he was last seen, and officers believe he may have been accidentally run over by a bulldozer on a building site. From Kos, Danny Savage reports.
Behind blue and white British police tape, a corner of a Greek island is cordoned off. This is the house where Ben Needham was last seen alive. Officers now believe he could have been accidentally run over and buried by a bulldozer here on the day he vanished in 1991.
It's got to be said, I'm optimistic that we may find something of significance that's going to assist us in giving an answer to Ben's family.
The senior officer here is hopeful that this mystery could finally be solved in the coming days.
Every item that we find is going to be meticulously looked at and made sure that it is either something of significance or otherwise. The earth is going to be lifted, it's going to be gone through in finite detail just to make sure that we don't miss anything.
Ben Needham was 21 months old when he vanished in Kos. His family has always believed he was abducted and is still alive. But his family has now been told to prepare for the worst. Specialist officers are expected to dig in this olive grove and an adjoining field for up to 12 days, looking for any trace of the little boy last seen playing outside this house a quarter of a century ago. Another search here 4 years ago brought his traumatised mother to Kos, adamant he was still alive.
I will never give up, and we will do whatever it takes to find Ben and let him know the truth of who he is. Thank you.
And if nothing is found here, Ben Needham's family will forever be wondering what happened to their little boy. Danny Savage, BBC News, Kos.
Now, the tribute from Jack Nicklaus couldn't have been simpler or warmer. He was the king of our sport and always will be. He was talking about Arnold Palmer, who's died at the age of 87. In a sparkling career, he won over 90 tournaments, including 7 majors. Adrian Hobart looks back on a career that included so much more than tournament wins.
Not many sportsmen truly justify a nickname as grand as the King, but for Arnold Palmer, the accolade was entirely apt. His attacking style of golf and genuinely warm personality made both a sporting and a cultural impact across the United States in the late 1950s, when television began to draw big audiences. He loved winning tournaments, but more than that, he loved the game of golf.
I always say one thing, that if I can teach a young man coming along, and I've seen a lot of them, Tiger, and I can go back to Nicklaus and others, if I can teach them to leave the game better when they leave than they found it when they arrived, then I've been successful.
His success on the course started at the 1958 Masters, and he would go on to win 7 majors in 7 years, often going down the stretch with his great rival and friend, Jack Nicklaus. Nicklaus describes Palmer as an icon, a legend, a pioneer. He showed his entrepreneurial side as he teamed up with lawyer Mark McCormack to form the marketing company IMG that paved the way for future generations to reap huge rewards in prize money and endorsements.
Every player that's here that plays on tour, I mean, he did so much for the game of golf at a time when golf needed him in the 60s and 70s. He brought golf to the masses. I mean, and he leaves a legacy that no one else in any other sport, I think, can leave. I think he's left the biggest legacy of any sports star.
Palmer's patronage of the Open Championship in Britain helped re-energise the event, and he encouraged more of his compatriots to fly the Atlantic to play the oldest major championship. Having a connection with fans was key. He made sure every autograph was legible. He actually disliked being known as the King, and his genial nature and love of the sport saw him play competitively late into his 70s. "I'm not interested in being a hero," he once said. "I just want to play some golf."
Arnold Palmer, who has died at the age of 87. Now, finally on the programme, speedy sausage dogs have been entertaining crowds at Melbourne's annual Dachshund race. The charity event sees the animals compete on a 15-metre track in their smart black and white uniforms. The canine competitors showed off their creative outfits. You can see them coming up, but one was a cowboy, another dressed as a tank, a few other interesting diversions. One of the sausage dogs could have even seen sporting the traditional Australian red and yellow lifeguard uniform. And some good stripes going on there as well. I know my sausage dog could have given some of those a run for their money. If you want to get in touch with us on BBC World News, I'm Karen BBC on Twitter. Thanks very much for being with us on the programme today.